Welcome to Tales of the Bard. Step into a world where stories come alive and imagination knows no bounds. Join me as I weave enchanting tales reminiscent of the bards of old, sharing legends, myths, and original stories that will transport you to distant lands and forgotten times. As Venenum approached the barracks, her fury only deepened. The Calder estate wasn't just a sprawling mansion. It had its own small army, enough to defend against any outside threats. But right now, those guards were supposed to be under her command, and they had failed miserably. With a sharp inhale, she pushed open the heavy doors to the commander's office, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. The commander, a burly man with years of experience under his belt, sat behind his desk, going over reports. His stern expression faltered when he saw the storm brewing on Venenum's face. She didn't wait for pleasantries. "You incompetent fool!" she screamed, slamming her hands on his desk, making the papers and inkpot rattle. "What in the gods' names are your men doing? Sleeping while spiders crawl into my estate? My guards are wrapped in silk hanging like cursed eggs, and you sit here doing nothing?" The commander stood quickly, but even his height couldn't match the force of Venenum's fury. "My lady, with all due respect..." "With all due respect?" she interrupted, her voice dripping with venom. "Your respect means nothing if your men can't do the simplest task of protecting this estate. Skryla was here. Do you even realize what that means? If I hadn't seen it myself, I'd have thought you were letting her waltz in with an invitation." The commander's face paled slightly at the mention of Skryla. He had heard the stories of the Spider Woman and her deadly talents. "Skryla? She attacked the estate? I wasn't aware." "No, you weren't," Venenum snapped. "And now my men are trapped in silk and we have enemies lurking in the shadows. Jonty is alive, and if he's planning something, it will be your failure that allows it to happen." The commander's fist clenched at his sides. "I will have more men on the patrols, my lady. I'll double the guard." "You'll do more than that," Venenum hissed, stepping closer, her eyes burning into his. "I want Skryla hunted down. I want her found, and I want her dead. And if anyone even whispers that Jonty is nearby, I want them in chains." She turned on her heel, but before leaving the room, she added in a deadly whisper, "If you fail me again, Commander, it will be your head next." The commander's jaw tightened as she left, but he knew better than to argue with Venenum when she was in this kind of mood. He would have to move fast, or the consequences would be far worse than any battle he'd ever fought. Commander Havric Stormfist stormed out of his office, his heavy boots echoing through the barracks. His usually stern face was twisted into a mask of rage. Today was different. Today, those lazy, incompetent guards would face consequences. The humiliation he had suffered at Venenum's hands still burned in his chest, and the image of those cocooned fools wrapped in silk only fueled his anger further. "Get those two idiots out of the webbing," he barked at a group of soldiers standing nearby. They snapped to attention, fear flashing in their eyes as they scrambled to obey. No one dared cross the commander when he was in this kind of mood. Havric marched toward the stables where the cocooned guards were still suspended like helpless prey. As he approached, his fists clenched. How had they allowed Skryla of all people, to infiltrate the estate undetected? When the soldiers finally cut the two guards down from the silk, Havric was already there, looming over them with a scowl that could cut through steel. The two men collapsed to the ground, their limbs stiff from being wrapped up all night, but Havric didn't care about their discomfort. "Get up," he snarled. "You'll wish that spider had finished you by the time I'm through." The guards, trembling and weak, scrambled to their feet, their faces pale with fear. They knew what was coming. Havric had no patience for failure, and their incompetence had put the entire estate at risk. "You let a spider and a cat make fools of you," Havric growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You let them walk right in and out without so much as raising the alarm. Tell me, are you guards or children?" The guards stammered, but no explanation would satisfy him. The fear of what was coming next silenced them as they stood, heads bowed in shame. "Back to your posts," Havric commanded, his tone as cold as steel. "And if you fail me again, there won't be enough left of you for Venenum to finish." With that, he turned on his heel, leaving the guards to contemplate their fates. Today they had been spared, but the weight of Havric's fury still hung over them, like a sword ready to fall at any moment. Havric glared down at the two guards, their shame evident as they shifted uncomfortably. His patience was long gone, and he wasn't finished punishing them. "And one more thing," he added, his voice cutting through the tension. "Report to the groundskeeper immediately." The guards exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what worse fate awaited them. Havrick's lip curled into a cruel smirk. Seems we've got a blockage in the latrines. Congratulations, you two are on sewer duty. Their faces blanched, horror replacing the shame as they realized what he meant. But before they could protest, Havrick turned and strode away, his final words ringing in their ears. Get to work. You might be good for something after all. The two guards hesitated only for a moment before rushing off, knowing there was no room for argument. The stench of failure would cling to them for days, literally and figuratively. Venenum didn't bother to knock as she shoved the heavy door to Calder's lavish bedroom open. The scent of perfume and the flicker of dim candlelight greeted her, but she had no patience for the scene that unfolded inside. A young woman, half-dressed, scurried out of the room in a rush, clutching her garments to her chest. Venenum's cold gaze barely flickered in the woman's direction. She had more important matters to deal with. "Get up!" she screamed, her voice sharp enough to shatter the room's fleeting silence. "We have problems." Calder, still lounging in his bed, groaned as he stirred, rubbing his eyes with a lazy hand. His dark hair was disheveled, and he clearly had no interest in being dragged from his slumber. "What in the God's name, Venenum?" he muttered, his voice rough with sleep. "Can't this wait until after breakfast?" But Venenum was having none of his casual dismissal. She marched toward the bed, her fury palpable. "No, it cannot wait!" she snapped, yanking the covers from him in one swift motion. Calder sat up, startled, his eyes narrowing as he tried to comprehend her rage. "Skryla was here," she hissed, her hands trembling with barely suppressed anger. "She attacked the estate. Your guards are wrapped in silk, hanging like fools, and Jonty is still alive. This whole operation is about to unravel." Calder's expression shifted from annoyance to something far darker as the weight of her words sunk in. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, sitting upright as he ran a hand through his hair, his mind clearly waking up to the gravity of the situation. "Jonty's alive?" he asked, his voice now laced with cold calculation. "I thought Milas—" "Well, she didn't," Venenum interrupted. "Your precious assassin failed, and now we have a problem. Skryla knows something, and Jonty's out there, alive and plotting. This needs to be handled, Calder, or we're both going to find ourselves in chains." Calder's eyes gleamed with something darker than fear, more like anger mixed with the thrill of a challenge. He stood, pulling on a robe as he paced toward the window, gazing out over the estate. "So," he said quietly, "Jonty thinks he can outsmart me." Venenum crossed her arms, her gaze cold. "He's not working alone, Calder. If Skryla's involved, they have help. And if we don't move now, they'll bring everything down around us." Calder turned to face her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Then we'll have to remind them who they're dealing with." Venenum's lip curled into a smirk, but her eyes remained hard as steel. "Good, because this time, we finish the job." Venenum descended the hidden staircase, each step echoing ominously as she entered the mansion's underbelly. The walls became damp, encrusted with moss and veins of black rock that seemed to pulse faintly, feeding off the darkness. At the bottom, she reached the door to her secret chamber, a place forbidden to all but her. She whispered a spell, and the door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in an eerie, unnatural glow. This was her sanctum, where secrets and shadows danced together, the air thick with the scent of rare herbs, blood-stained metal, and forbidden oils. The walls were adorned with intricate runes, sigils, and shelves lined with sinister relics, jars containing animal bones, dried eyes, and dark vials labeled in a language known to only a few. In the center of it all stood her blackened altar, where she practiced the dark arts taught to her by Malghora herself. With a sense of grim purpose, Venenum crossed to the altar. She reached for a small black vial, a rare treasure known as Shadowblood. The liquid inside was almost alive, a thick substance that shifted and swirled with a silvery gleam like liquid darkness. It was precious and powerful, reserved only for summoning the highest forms of dark magic. This was not an act to be taken lightly. She opened the vial, pouring a thin, deliberate stream of shadow blood into an ornate bowl etched with ancient, menacing runes. The liquid hissed as it touched the bowl, reacting instantly, swirling and coiling like a living entity. It spread across the bowl, and soon, tendrils of dark smoke rose into the air, thick and curling, filling the chamber with an oppressive chill that prickled against her skin. Venenum steadied her breath, her heart pounding as she murmured the incantation Malghora had taught her, the words slipping from her lips in the guttural tones of an ancient, forgotten tongue. The Shadowblood stirred, rising higher until it formed a tall, spectral figure cloaked in shadows, the formidable and fearsome presence of Malghora. The figure leaned forward, the smoke coalescing into the semblance of a face, dark eyes, sharp and gleaming like blackened glass, fixed intently on Venenum. Malghora's voice slithered through the room, deep and malevolent, with an edge that could slice through steel. "Venenum," she intoned, each syllable dripping with dark power. "Why do you disturb my rest?" Venenum dropped to one knee, bowing her head in respect. "Forgive me, Lady Malghora. I have summoned you because our plans have been compromised." Malghora's eyes narrowed, and a glint of displeasure flashed within them. "Compromised?" Her voice was like a dagger, chilling and unforgiving. "Explain yourself." "Skryla has intervened and Jonty yet lives," Venenum whispered, each word tasting bitter on her tongue. "We sent the signal as planned, but Jonty survived the attempt on his life. They outmaneuvered us, and Skryla has joined them." Malghora's expression darkened, the shadows around her twisting and growing more ominous. "So, they dare to defy me?" Her voice grew low, her anger simmering like a storm. "Foolish. They know not the powers they provoke. But tell me, Venenum, how did you fail me so completely?" Venenum's throat tightened under the weight of Malghora's wrath, but she kept her gaze lowered, knowing better than to deflect blame. "I underestimated their reach. Skryla's involvement was unexpected. She used her transformations and her network of spies to shield Jonty." Malghora's figure leaned closer, her presence filling the room with an oppressive cold. "Unexpected?" she spat, her voice a deadly whisper. "Nothing is unexpected when it comes to the weak. If they have survived, it is only because you allowed them to, and now they believe they have the power to resist me." Venenum swallowed hard, her fingers clenching at her sides. "Please, Lady Malghora, grant me another chance. I will eliminate Jonty and Skryla, I swear it. But I need guidance and reinforcements. They grow bold, and I fear they may rally others." Malghora was silent for a moment, her face unreadable, though the shadows around her churned, thick with malice. Finally she spoke, her voice laced with a chilling calm that was more frightening than her anger. "Very well, you shall have reinforcements. I will send those who thrive in darkness, souls who have known no mercy. But heed this, Venenum." Her tone dropped, each word dripping with deadly intent. "If you fail me again, even your darkest arts will not shield you from my wrath." A shiver ran down Venenum's spine, but she managed a nod. "Thank you, Lady Malghora. I will not fail again." Malghora's figure began to dissipate, but her eyes lingered, a final promise of the pain that awaited should Venenum disappoint her. The smoke coiled, swirling back into the bowl until it was only a faint tendril, then nothing. The room grew eerily still, yet the chill of Malghora's presence lingered, heavy and stifling. Venenum exhaled, her mind racing, her hands trembling slightly. She had Malghora's support, for now, but this was her final chance. Rising from her kneeling position, she straightened, her face a mask of cold resolve. She would see this through, or she would suffer, and she would ensure that Jonty, Skryla, and anyone who dared stand with them would suffer first. The war was far from over, and Venenum was ready to wage it in blood and shadows. Jonty's heart nearly stopped as Shadow, the massive black cat, leapt through the open window and landed silently in the middle of the room. The cat's eyes were wide, sharp as polished obsidian, and his low, menacing growl sent a shiver down Jonty's spine. Shadow's gaze was fixed on the door, his entire body tense, ready for something Jonty couldn't yet see. Jonty's pulse quickened as he heard faint footsteps coming up the stairs. Shadow slinked under the bed, his body coiled like a spring, muscles taut and ready to pounce. He was a silent, watchful shadow, waiting for the perfect moment. With a quiet breath, Jonty moved behind the door, his hands steady despite his racing heart. Whoever was coming up those stairs had no idea what was waiting for them. The door creaked open just a crack, and a shadowy figure peered inside, eyes searching the dim room. In one swift motion, Jonty reached out, grabbing the intruder by the collar and yanking him into the room. The figure stumbled, a startled yelp escaping his lips, and Jonty pulled the door shut behind him, holding the man by his shirt front. "Who are you and what do you want?" Jonty hissed, his voice low and dangerous. But as the intruder's face came into view, Jonty's eyes widened in surprise. It was the tavern owner, Vachi Vorster, his face pale and his eyes wide with shock. The man looked Jonty up and down, his mouth opening and closing as if he were seeing a ghost. You're supposed to be dead," Vachi blurted out, his voice barely more than a whisper. As the words left his mouth, realization dawned on him, his face draining of color as he realized his mistake. Jonty's eyes narrowed, his grip on Vachi's collar tightening. "So you knew?" he demanded, his voice hard. "You knew what they planned?" Vachi swallowed, his eyes darting nervously toward the door as if looking for an escape. I didn't. They just said you'd been taken care of. I thought, who told you?" Jonty cut him off, his tone like steel. Vachi stammered, looking anywhere but at Jonty. "It was just whispers, you know? People were talking, saying that the Thieves Guild, well, that they had plans for you. I didn't know I didn't think." But before he could finish, a low, rumbling growl emerged from under the bed. Shadow crawled forward, his eyes glinting dangerously as he sized up Vachi, a silent warning emanating from the massive cat. Jonty released Vachi's collar but kept a close watch on him. "You'd better start telling me everything you know, Vachi, because if you're mixed up in this, Shadow here will make sure you regret it." Vachi's hands trembled as he glanced from Jonty to the black cat, Shadow's steady, predatory gaze never leaving him. He licked his lips nervously, clearly unnerved by the presence of the watchful feline. "Look, I heard Calder Vane was looking to clean up loose ends. That's all I know, I swear. They paid me to keep an eye out to make sure you stayed out of trouble. Or if you didn't, to report it." Jonty's jaw tightened. "So you were spying on me?" Vachi's face fell, guilt flashing in his eyes. "It's not like that, Jonty. I didn't have a choice. The guild, Calder, they don't ask. They demand. I never thought they'd actually—" He trailed off, his gaze dropping. Jonty's eyes narrowed. "And if they come back, what will you tell them?" Vachi swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. "That I saw nothing. That Jonty's ghost haunts the tavern." Satisfied but still cautious, Jonty nodded. "Good. Because if you betray me again, I promise it won't be Shadow you'll need to worry about." Vachi nodded, fear etched across his face as he quickly excused himself, backing toward the door. Shadow's eyes tracked him the entire way, a quiet reminder of the consequences that awaited him should he betray Jonty's trust again. As the door closed softly behind Vachi, Jonty let out a slow breath, his mind whirling. Calder was closing in, and even the tavern was no longer a safe haven. But for now, he had Shadow, his silent guardian, and as long as the cat was by his side, he wasn't entirely alone in this deadly game. Jonty moved quietly through his small room, his hands working swiftly as he packed a few essentials, clothes, a dagger, and most importantly, his prized loot. The instrument was more than just a means to earn his keep. It was a source of comfort, a reminder of his purpose. He slung the loot carefully over his shoulder, the familiar weight settling against his back. Turning to Shadow, who sat watching him intently, Jonty gave a nod. "Let's go. The Druid's Grove is our best shot." Shadow blinked in understanding, his black fur catching the dim light, and without a sound, he leapt through the open window, landing gracefully on the ground below. Jonty watched as the cat's sleek form melted into the shadows, a silent guardian scouting ahead to make sure they were alone. Moments later, Shadow re-emerged, joined by a smaller ginger cat who trotted up beside him. The two felines exchanged a look, and it was almost as if they were speaking, silent, meaningful glances passing between them, tails flicking in a coded rhythm only they understood. Jonty crept down the stairs, casting a final glance back at his room before stepping into the night. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his decision. His life in the tavern, the security it had once offered, was behind him now. Outside, Shadow and the ginger cat sat waiting, both alert and watchful. The ginger cat chirped a soft greeting as Jonty approached, then turned and began to lead the way, glancing back to make sure he was following. Shadow padded beside Jonty, his powerful form a steady presence as they slipped through the quiet streets. They moved swiftly, the cats guiding him through a series of winding back alleys and hidden paths. Shadow and his ginger companion were well aware of the dangers lurking around every corner, and they knew which routes would allow them to slip past unnoticed. Jonty followed closely, his heart racing as he stayed near his feline guides, trusting them implicitly. The ginger cat trotted ahead, pausing occasionally to listen for any unusual sounds. Once the cat's ears perked, and Shadow immediately stopped, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the dark street ahead. Jonty froze, watching as the two cats stood completely still, waiting, their bodies tense and ready. A faint rustling sounded from a side alley, but it passed, just a stray animal in the night. The cats exchanged a glance and continued, and Jonty followed, marveling at the precision and caution of his silent protectors. Finally, the city began to fade behind them, the cobblestone streets giving way to the forest paths that led toward the Druid's Grove. Jonty felt a sense of relief wash over him as they entered the trees, their shadows stretching across the moonlit path. Here, he would be safe, at least for a while. Shadow stopped and looked back at Jonty, his green eyes bright in the darkness, almost as if to say, "We're nearly there." And beside him, the ginger cat chirped softly, its tail high, leading the way deeper into the forest. Jonty took a steadying breath, his hand brushing against the strings of his lute for reassurance. The grove was close, and he knew it would offer him refuge, a place to regroup. And with Shadow and his loyal network of feline allies by his side, he felt for the first time in days that he might have a chance to survive this.